This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to episode number 54. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast for the 27th of October 2006. In episode number 49, we welcomed Richard Larson and Elizabeth Larson here on the Project Management Podcast, and we talked about the topic of projects without borders and the issues that a project manager is faced with when gathering requirements on a multicultural project. Today, we welcome Richard and Elizabeth back to discuss some of their best practices of engaging stakeholders in the process of gathering requirements. But let's start out with the most important question of today's episode. Who won the books? Yes, who won the books? For the last 3 weeks, we have done a book giveaway of Bas de Baar's new book entitled Surprise, Now You're a Software Project Manager. And the winners are Ahmed Osman from Melbourne, Australia, and Mark Cockburn from Sydney, Australia. We've had people write in from all over the world, and the fact that my wife has pulled out 2 winners from Australia is just pure coincidence. Nevertheless, my congratulations go out to Ahmed and Mark. Wait a minute, didn't my wife draw 2 people from North America in the last book giveaway? I think I'm going to have to talk to her about her picking technique. Today's episode is sponsored by Method 123, the providers of about 50 different kinds of project management templates. Now, about a year and a half ago or so, I was tasked in our PMO at my company to take our methodology that we had, it was about 300 pages thick, and make that simpler, simplify it for our own company. And I've been wondering, if I have had those Method 123 templates at that time, would that have simplified my work? Would that have made it easier? So what I did is I took those templates and I compared them to my final result that I had. And I have to admit, no, no, it wouldn't have made it simpler, because my work was to take a 300-page methodology, analyze it, and break it down to a simpler form of what we already had. However, if I had to do this again, if I had to build these templates again, I would probably use the Method 123 templates as a basis, and I would take their simplicity and use them as a basis for what we have now. And of course, if I had to build everything from scratch, then Method 123 templates would definitely be my choice. To check out the Method 123 templates, please click on the banner on our website or on the link called PM Templates to increase your productivity. You'll find that under PM Help in the left-hand navigation. Alright, so much for our sponsor this week. And now let us move on to the one and only announcement I have, and that is the fact that I have announced several times here on the podcast that I'm working on the Prepcast. The Project Management Prepcast is a new program that is aimed at all those of you out there who are currently studying for the PMP exam. Yes, that way you can actually study with your iPod. You can use your iPod to get ready for the PMP exam. And yes, it is ready. I have launched the Project Management Prepcast. Everything's there. The first episode is out. The website is ready. Why don't we listen right now to the promo that I have created for the Prepcast, and then let's move right into the helpful resources. Are you studying to take the PMP exam? Are you tired of reading the PMBOK guide yet? Wouldn't it be great if you could use your MP3 player to prepare for the exam? Well, now you can by listening to the Project Management Prepcast. I am Cornelius Fichtner, the host of the Project Management Podcast, and now also the host of the Project Management Prepcast. In this new program, I will systematically get you acquainted with the tools and techniques, methodologies and theories to help you feel ready to sit for the PMI's Project Management Professional exam. It's never been easier, and trust me, it's much more entertaining than the PMBOK guide. And the even better news, it's free until January 2006. So go ahead and listen in today at www.pmprepcast.com. Together, we can put those 3 letters behind your name. We are continuing our helpful resources with recommendations that you, the listeners, have sent in. In today's episode, we have 3 listeners who have sent in their resources. Let us start out with Nancy Parks. Nancy writes, "Hello, Cornelius. I love the podcast. You do a great job and perform a great service to the whole project management community." Thank you, Nancy. My favorite website is the e-reads and reference section of the PMI website. That is in the PMI members only section. There are a lot of books there. If you don't mind reading online, it's great. This is a great benefit of PMI membership. Keep up the great podcast, Nancy Parks from the United States. I have myself actually used the e-reads from the PMI, and that's quite nice. They have dozens and dozens of project management related books that you can read online. Really nice. Our next reference comes from Andy Anderson. Andy writes, "I am not sure if you have given out this reference before. PMHub.net calls this reference the mother of all PM sites, and it is the Columbia University Project Management Resource Center. And you can find that at www.projectreference.com. And again, this comes to us from Andy Anderson. And I checked this out. I didn't know this reference before, and trust me, it is the mother of all PM sites. It has over 400 project management related links on one humongous page. So if you're really into project management, you will definitely find something on that one. And our final helpful resource today comes to us from Chris Katar. He writes, "Cornelius, I'm an avid listener. In fact, I have listened to every one of your episodes. I love the show and the helpful hints. I recommend 2 programs to you today. I have used both of them to manage multiple projects, and they work really well. In fact, Basecamp is the core tool that we use to manage all of our web development projects here at TechWise." All right, and his 2 suggestions are jsportal.com and, of course, basecamphq.com. And these come to us from Sorry about that, Chris. Chris Katar. Or Katar? Chris Katar. And like he said, both of these references are, of course, tools, software to manage your projects. Now, these 3 listeners are the last 3 who have sent in recommendations to me. If you have any helpful resources yourself that you would like to share, please send them my way, pmpodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, you're just going to have to make do with the selection that I provide myself. As always, go to the pmpodcast.com and you can find the helpful resources, the complete selection of helpful resources in the left-hand navigation, or at the bottom of every episode you will find the helpful resources for this episode link. And now let us move on to today's interview with Elizabeth Larsen and Richard Larsen. They are back to give us some of their best practices on how to involve your project stakeholders into gathering the requirements. And I wanted to start out by apologizing for the occasional clicking and crackling in the recording that you hear. Especially at one point where Elizabeth is speaking, you will notice that her voice suddenly fades out and there is some white noise that is blanketed over and then she comes back. I didn't want to cut out that particular response, even though there are some audio problems, because it's a good comment that she makes, and even though there is a bit missing in between, you can still follow the argument. So here's the interview. Enjoy.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview. Today with Elizabeth Larsen and Richard Larsen from Watermark Learning.
It has been about 5 weeks since my interview with Elizabeth Larsen and Richard Larsen from Watermark Learning, and at that time we talked on the topic of projects without borders, the difficulties that we project managers face with intercultural projects. Well, Richard and Elizabeth are back. And welcome again to the program. Hello, Richard.
Glad to be back.
And hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, glad to be back as well.
Well, today we'll be talking about topic gathering requirements and go away, please. But before we get into that, Richard, why don't you take a moment and remind our listeners of your illustrious career?
Well, about 30 years ago, I started working in the field at a large bank as an EDP liaison, which today is an outdated sounding title, but it really was all of the functions of a business analyst. And there really wasn't that kind of career in the past, so I went the technical route and worked in application development for a number of years, doing many different kinds of projects. I always seemed to get tapped to be taking responsibility for project planning, although I was never formally trained, and I made every mistake in the book as I learned about it. And so after a number of years of painful experiences, I wanted to share what I had learned with other people. And so all those hard lessons learned and pain really prompted me to go into the training field, and about 15 years ago I started Watermark Learning as a result. And now I feel really fortunate I can combine many years as a BA, a project manager, and overall general business management every day, and I love it.
And Elizabeth, your career is not any less illustrious. Please remind us as well of what you did.
I started my career doing management consulting, presenting recommendations to management. That led into being a business analyst. I was a business analyst for almost a decade. I was promoted into project management. I was a project manager for almost 15 years at 3 different organizations, working on large IT projects, introducing new technology and the associated business processes to organizations. I joined Watermark in 1996 and have been training, presenting, writing articles. It's been just wonderful.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm so pleased to have you back, really, really. The interview that we're doing today is based on an article that both of you have written. It is titled, Gathering Requirements, Go Away Please. And I think the general feel from the article that I got is that it is very important to engage stakeholders in the requirements gathering process. What is the single most important factor, then, for engaging stakeholders?
There are really several really important ones, and I think that if I had to choose the most important way to engage stakeholders is to build a relationship and start building trust with them. There are a lot of things that go into that, but I think if we're really going to engage our stakeholders, if we're going to elicit and document the requirements, there really has to be an element of trust because we will be changing their lives. I think there are some other things that are really important, clearly defining roles and responsibilities, being the focal point for communicating, for reporting project progress, are some other things that are important as well to make sure that our sponsors don't forget about us and that they are engaged.
Well, I think trust is probably the single most important factor, because without it, you're going to either get incomplete requirements, you are going to get people that may want to sabotage a project because they don't want to give up the expertise and the power they might have with the current system, and so there's nothing in it for them to want to give up on all of those things. And so trust is no guarantee, but without it, it becomes very, very difficult.
Elizabeth, how do you build trust then with your stakeholders?
There are several different aspects, I think, to building trust. First of all, I think it's very, very important to communicate bad news. That gives you some credibility. So we can't just say the project's going well. When there's an issue, I think it is important to take that to the people that need to know it. I think it's important, very important, to be genuine, to be authentic, and of course honest. I think that we need to build our credibility, and part of that is being competent. I think part of it is admitting our mistakes. I think part of it is making recommendations. I think we need to figure out what the business problem is and help people try and solve it. And I really do think that builds trust, because if we can alleviate some pain, people are apt to put their trust into us. Developing relationships, being genuinely interested, silly things like bringing treats, laughing together, valuing other people's input, collaborating are just a few. Rich, what else would you add?
I think you covered a lot of these central things. I think you can maybe sum up some of what you said by respect, both for yourself and others, because that sets the stage for that. And so some of the things, acknowledging your mistakes, acknowledging contributions of others, giving credit where credit is due. There are a lot of different things that become skilled. Many times we end up intuitively doing things to build trust because we all have relationships that are trustworthy. It's just where there is difficulty for a variety of reasons why you can actually build skills to go and work on trust factors with other people to help enhance that trust where it's not coming naturally.
Okay, so I'm working on the trust building and I'm bringing treats and I'm laughing with people. And at what point, Elizabeth, at what point do I know, okay, my people trust me now, I can go gather requirements?
There are a couple of aspects to that. First of all, we build trust throughout the project. We can't just say, I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks building trust, and then we gather requirements. We build trust as we're gathering requirements. Now, needless to say, if I have built credibility as a project manager, as a business analyst on prior projects, I come into the project with more trust than not. I think that part of it is being prepared, being organized, so that when you're meeting with a sponsor and the business clients, they trust that you do have that element of competency. And that's much more important than saying, look, I've worked on lots of projects in the past and I've been successful. So we build trust throughout the project. And as I said, part of that is acknowledging mistakes and communicating bad news. So that trust isn't something we just do in the beginning of the project and hope that people believe us. I'm not sure I answered your question.
Well, I really think there's no point where you say, aha, I've got trust, but there are points when you can see where people are not trusting you. And maybe that's perhaps in the end more important, where you sit in a meeting, and I was just talking with a student last week. She said stakeholders at a process requirements meeting, they would sit in the room, you can't see me on this podcast, but their arms folded tightly against their chest with a scowl on their face. And you can learn to recognize those signs that, there's some trust issues here that we haven't overcome them. So maybe the absence of that indicates, well, you've made some progress. But I think it's probably more in human nature to notice when the trust is not there, and there's no magic point where it suddenly starts happening, but it's a slower process sometimes.
While we're talking about your students, Richard, us project managers, we're always looking for the silver bullet, right? Do you at Watermark in your training sessions have some sort of almost like a checklist? If you want to build trust, do the following 5 things.
We do. I mean, we bring it up in many classes, don't we, Elizabeth? That
We do in all classes, and we talk
really,
about
I mean,
yeah.
there
We do have a checklist. Some things I mentioned to you
Yes.
came from our checklist, but that doesn't guarantee that that trust will be built. But it is something for people to think about.
And some of those are in the article that we've written that I think your listeners will be able to refer to after in the notes, correct?
Yes, absolutely. I will definitely put a link to this article into the show notes. So we're talking at this point, we're talking about resistance. How do you deal with the resistance that you feel from your clients, from your stakeholders, Elizabeth?
It depends on what the resistance is and who it's coming from. First of all, right from the get-go, if I don't have an engaged sponsor, that's a huge risk for me. So assuming I don't feel that I can manage a project or gather requirements if I don't have the will of the people with whom I'm dealing, including the sponsor. If I have a really engaged sponsor and I'm really solving a major business problem, I have in the past gone to the sponsor and I've talked about a requirements workshop that I've had where someone wasn't engaged and I could tell that there was definite resistance strategies for getting that person engaged, coming better from the sponsor than from me. There are times again where people can be very, very threatened by what we're doing. Another major way that I handle this, besides talking to the sponsor, which to me, again, that partnership, that relationship with the sponsor is very, very important. But another way that I handle the resistance is by making sure that people's personal goals are aligned with the organizational goals and making sure that my project goals are aligned with the organization's goals. And having that kind of discussion, because if there is misalignment among any of those, then that needs to be a further discussion.
How do you find out about the personal goals of your team members then?
Have that discussion. And as a project manager, that's a discussion that I always have in the beginning of a project, because I want to make sure that alignment is there. And there might be some times when personal goals, where there is a misalignment, then it's important to talk about a career in the organization, and does it make sense for that person? That hasn't happened very often, but it has happened. So just want to make sure, again, particularly if I have resistance among team members. And to me, that's slightly easier than if I have resistance among my business clients or who feel threatened by the end results of the project, and I have definitely had that. And sometimes I haven't found out about it. I would meet with someone. I remember this one person on my sales promotion project, and we would meet with him, and he'd say, every time we'd meet, well, I don't remember telling you that. Or, did I tell you that last week? Well, that's just plain wrong. And so week after week after week, we just weren't getting the requirements. And then we finally figured it out. And that's when we had a talk with the sponsor.
Right, that's actually quite a good segue over to the actual requirements gathering process, because we've talked about building trust, we've talked about working on the resistance. Now let's move over into the actual requirements gathering. What is your approach then in regards to gathering requirements from your business clients, from your stakeholders, Elizabeth?
We gather requirements, we call the way we gather it progressive elaboration. So we start with the very, very highest level requirements that we get from our project sponsor, and we document that in the project charter. We then move to flesh that out. I kind of think about putting meat on the bones, if you will. We flesh it out, and we look at our project deliverables, and we think about what are the features and functions of each project deliverable, and that gives us our high-level requirements. And then we need to progressively elaborate that into the detailed requirements. Always, always, always keeping in mind what business problem are we solving, what is the strategic direction of the organization, what are the business objectives, then what are the project objectives, and in what ways does do the requirements link up to the project objectives, the business objectives, the strategic direction, and the business problem that we're solving. So that's at a very, very high level, keeping the business context in mind, because if our requirements don't have that upward linkage, we are going to get scope creep.
Richard, do you have a preferred documentation method for requirements?
Well, we do. We have what we call a concurrent business modeling framework that has some core features to it. There are 5 main elements of it. At the center of it is a requirements list with a traceability matrix to manage things. And then we emphasize process models to capture the business process, use case models where that process involves an interaction with a system, data that supports the use cases in the business processes, and then interface requirements that really touch most everything. And so that kind of requirements package with those elements plus subsidiary documentation as needed tend to be what forms the basis for really sufficient requirements without overkill. And so it's been a very practical and effective framework that people can apply really in any methodology. And we found some success with it going across from company to company with that approach.
I find that gathering requirements is always an engaged process, whether you do it by modeling with UML or whether you use your framework that you have just explained. And I'm either faced with stakeholders that are disengaged, who don't really want to because they think they've given me everything they need, or as time progresses, there's just, this project is so old, we're working on 3 new projects, the grass is greener on the other side. Elizabeth, how can I keep my stakeholders engaged?
2 answers to that. First is take large projects and break them into small pieces, so that we are constantly producing something of value to the business. And I don't mean just necessarily using an iterative approach to either managing projects or gathering requirements. But if we have large projects, break it down into pieces. We did that with sales promotions so that we produced a transaction piece and a reporting piece and a forecasting piece, and so that kept people engaged. The other thing, of course, is I keep going back to this, but if my sponsor isn't engaged, then everyone else, all my business experts are going to lose interest as well. From my perspective, if it's not important to the business, I don't want to be working on the project. If it is important, then I need my sponsor to explain to the world why it's an important project. So I keep going back to that relationship with the sponsor, which is so key. And keep it short.
Yeah, once again, we're back to the trust.
We're back to the trust and keep it short. Show people and actually implement deliverables and in my case that happened to be software that was fully functional, but short pieces of it.
To add on to that, another thread that we see a lot of applications for has to do with what you might call even marketing or selling a change. We have other articles that deal with that, and essentially everybody listens to the radio station WIIFM, What's in it for me? And if you ignore that, you do that at your peril with keeping people engaged, because if there are benefits you can look at, especially when we center in on, as Elizabeth said earlier, solving business problems, taking away the pain, people really get engaged with that. And they know we're tuned into their radio station, and that helps immensely. And so there are a number of things from the sales field that you can apply to project management and business analysis that I think really has a lot to teach us as practitioners if we were to apply those and use them in sort of those hidden aspects of, as Elizabeth said earlier, we're always about change. We're bringing change to people's lives, and it's many times threatening. And so that has helped, I think, in keeping people engaged.
Let me make sure I understand correctly what you've said. You've said find out what makes your stakeholders tick, what they will get out of this project, where they have a pain, and make sure that they understand that this project will make that pain go away.
Right. That's a nice summary. Mm-hmm.
Great summary.
Good.
Much shorter than I said it.
Well, thank you. We've talked about building trust with the stakeholders on the project. Is it also important to go outside of the project and actually build trust within the company with people who may not necessarily be involved in the project that you're working on?
I do think that is really important. We have talked about the sponsor, but it is important to understand, if you will, the political landscape of the organization, to form relationships with people outside the project. You might be on one project this week or this year. Next week, you might be on a different project. Also, I just think that having people outside your immediate project helps you with some support that you might need. It helps if you need some information, if you need some understanding. So absolutely, I do think it is important.
Richard, do you have any other ideas of where you need to build trust as a project manager?
Well, again, I want to go back to it, and I don't want to sound like we're secret agents, but there are always project saboteurs, and people that you want to pay attention to, in addition to your champions, are people with high influence but low acceptance of what your project is doing. And looking at that almost as a guideline to find those kinds of stakeholders that might end up hurting the effort would be time well spent, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth and Richard. Mm-hmm. I think we have covered the topic of how to build trust, understanding, and relationships in the process of gathering requirements on your project. And it is now time to move over to our final 10 questions, the same 10 questions that I ask at the end of every interview. Last interview we had Elizabeth answer, and today we have Richard. Are you ready,
bet.
Richard?
Ask away.
All right. Ask away. Number one then. What was your favorite project?
I'd have to say it was more of a program in creating our certificate programs in conjunction with Auburn University. It was something we started from the ground up. We found an academic partner that was really a good fit for us. It offered a need that our clients were very much seeking, and just that whole effort taking us from nothing to having something. And it's still ongoing. I mean, this is several sub-projects in duration, so I'd have to say that was my favorite.
Number two, what project would you like to have managed?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm just going to go way out there and say the Apollo moon landing programs, because I've always been fascinated by space, and that must have been quite an effort to manage. And when you think about the vision and the lack of viability at the time that was announced by Kennedy back in whenever he did, and doing that in such a short amount of time was astounding.
Number three, what is your favorite project management book?
Well, like Elizabeth said last time we met, I think it was the Harold Kersner book on project management is a classic for all-around topics. And for preparing for the PMP exam, I actually used a different one. It's called the PMP Study Guide by Joseph Phillips. That really helped me a lot and helped me prepare for that exam.
Number four, what is the topic of the next seminar that you are planning to attend?
Well, I think last time we talked, Elizabeth said we're speaking at the PMI North American Congress in Seattle. And while we're there, we also get a chance to check out a number of other good speakers on a wide variety of topics. I'm interested in the program management certification in particular that PMI has launched, and I want to focus my attention on what that's all about and ways that we could tap into that initiative they have going on.
Number five, what is the best way to make a project fail?
I've got an easy answer. Just engage the sponsor and fail to show business benefits. And one leads to the other, probably. I mean, the benefits, if they're not there, the sponsor tends to lose interest fast.
Number six, how do you like to celebrate a successful project?
Well, celebrate early and often is my motto, and especially with food. That's a pretty much essential. And being who I am, I like to have lessons learned sessions that really focuses on what went right during a project and what can we do differently to improve the process the next time.
Number seven, in your projects, where do you focus most of your attention in order to be successful?
Well, I think both the project objectives and the features in and out of scope, because making sure they fit the business need. And I used to focus pretty much on the tasks and what has to be done, especially with given a deadline, and backing up and what do I need to do to make the deadline. And I still track tasks and plan them. That's certainly important. But I spend more energy comparing a project's deliverables to the business need and making sure that they're in alignment, and much less time I'm worrying over the detailed tasks.
Number 8, if you weren't a project manager, what would you like to be?
A sponsor. It's so important to and I like that in helping Cobra and Watermark. I get to play the role of a sponsor, and that's. But it is difficult because with so much riding on the sponsor's shoulder, I realize how important that is, and so I can't shirk that responsibility. So, it's a double-edged sword, sure. Yeah.
Number 9, what is the one thing that a project manager cannot live without?
A sponsor. I mean, it's so important. You can try to run a project without that, but you can't get very far. You certainly can't get resources and so on. So.
And finally, number 10, the oldest question in project management. What is more important in a project manager? Is it project management expertise or industry expertise?
Well, it is tough, but definitely the project management expertise. I tell students that if you're good at managing projects, you could potentially manage them in any industry. Well, maybe not rocket science, and I could never manage a moon project. That's a dream, but except for that, your skills are transferable from industry to industry. And given the choice between the two, I think I give the nod to the project management expertise.
Well, thank you. Richard, Elizabeth, I want to thank you once again for having been such great sports and having come back for a second interview, and also having fought with me once again through the Skype issues that we've had with dropped calls and voices suddenly fading out. I appreciate your time today, and thank you again for having been on the program.
Well, thank you for your time and having us.
You're welcome, and thank you for putting up with the problems of Skype too, Cornelius. It's been nice talking to you.
And that was Richard Larson and Elizabeth Larson sharing with us their best practices on requirements gathering and how to build trust with the stakeholders on your project. Let me remind you, as always, that you can find a link to purchase the book that Richard has recommended today in the helpful resources section of today's episode. And also in the helpful resources, there is a books category where you can find all the books from all the interview guests from the past. Tune in again next week when I will be speaking with Stacy Goff. He is the Vice President of the ASAPM, the American Society for the Advancement of Project Management. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at thepmpodcast.com, and now, of course, also at pmprepcast.com. Or you can send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. The nice thing about not planning is that failure comes as a complete surprise, rather than being preceded by a period of worry and depression. Until next time.